The tarmac was chaos incarnate. Hurricane Gloria, a Category 4 monster, had shifted its path with frightening unpredictability, turning what should have been a routine landing into a fight against nature itself. Planes were diverted, runways closed, and the storm's roar echoed across the airfield like a predator marking its territory. Flight 219, a Boeing 737 with 60 passengers, sat grounded at Charleston International Airport, engines off but spirits fraying. Inside the terminal, passengers whispered nervously, watching the storm's fury through rain-streaked windows. Parents clutched their children, some whispering prayers, some rocking silently, as though movement could ward off the violence outside. The airline staff hustled from one end of the concourse to the other, their faces tight with stress. Every new bulletin from meteorologists brought a deeper frown. Amid this turbulence of human anxiety, a small figure appeared on the far side of the terminal, walking steadily toward the chaos. Eleanor Hayes, 68, with silver-streaked hair tied back in a functional bun, and a leather flight jacket she'd kept from her years as a certified flight instructor, moved with a quiet purpose. Her steps were slow but unyielding, the kind of measured confidence that came from decades of experience. Years spent in the cockpit, years spent learning to read the sky like a second language. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Airline staff whispered as she passed, some openly smirking. "Who is she?" muttered a young flight attendant, notebook clutched to her chest. "She looks old." "Too old," another voice said under breath. "Let the pilots handle it. She's not even on the roster." Eleanor didn't flinch. Her eyes, gray and sharp as storm clouds themselves, scanned the chaos. She saw the tension in the faces of crew members, the fear in the eyes of passengers. She saw what no one else seemed to, the fragile line between life and disaster, and the knowledge that someone had to step up. Someone had to take control. That someone was her. Inside the pilot's lounge, Captain Marcus Bradley, a veteran with 25 years of commercial flight experience, rubbed his temples as he stared at the radar screens. The storm was moving faster than predicted, and his scheduled co-pilot had called in sick at the worst possible moment. He was facing an impossible choice: delay flights indefinitely while the hurricane intensified, or risk attempting takeoffs in conditions that would terrify even the most seasoned pilot. The phone buzzed constantly, each call another layer of pressure. Eleanor appeared at the door, a clipboard in hand, her posture unwavering. She waited until he looked up, and then she spoke, voice calm, almost eerily serene. "I can fly it." The room froze. Captain Bradley blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The air was heavy with disbelief. A young co-pilot snorted. "Excuse me, you're," he gestured vaguely at, "not even on the flight roster." "I don't need to be," Eleanor said simply. "I've trained on everything from small private planes to 737 simulators. I can handle this." Her tone wasn't arrogant, it was factual, measured, and impossibly steady. Laughter rippled through the lounge, sharp and incredulous. "She's 68, muttered one of the flight attendants under her breath. "She probably hasn't flown a real plane in years." Eleanor ignored them. She didn't need their validation. What mattered was outside the terminal, the wind ripping across the tarmac, the rain lashing against every surface, the sky twisting and darkening with a menace that made the human heart race. Every second counted, and she knew it. Hesitation would cost lives. Captain Bradley sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had seen the worst the skis could throw at him, and yet somehow this storm terrified him more than most. And yet there was something in Eleanor's eyes, a calm that didn't belong in someone her age, a clarity that spoke of experience, skill, and nerves of steel. Against his better judgment and perhaps against his ego, he nodded. "All right," he said. "You're coming with me to the cockpit, but understand this is not a drill. This is real. Real lives are at stake." Eleanor gave a slight nod, her jaw set. "I understand." As she followed him through the terminal, passengers and crew alike turned to watch. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is she? Can she really do it? They're letting her fly," Some shook their heads, skeptical. Others, perhaps secretly, felt a flicker of hope. Outside, the hurricane's fury was escalating. Winds had already reached gusts of 120 miles per hour, bending signs and tearing tarpaulin from structures. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos in stark white flashes. Rain slammed against windows with relentless ferocity. The storm was a living, breathing entity, daring humanity to interfere with its path. Eleanor's eyes didn't waver from the runway. She had flown through turbulence before, through storms that threatened to tear her small Cessna apart mid-flight, through clouds that seemed like they belonged to another planet entirely. But this was different. The stakes were higher, the danger more immediate, the lives at risk counted in dozens, not just herself. Passengers shuffled nervously, their luggage barely in hand. Some tried to keep calm, others whispered prayers under breath. The hurricane's wail grew louder, an almost human cry of warning that this was no ordinary storm. One mother clutched her child, rocking back and forth, mumbling, "Please just let us land safely." And Eleanor, calm amidst the fear, walked toward the waiting jet. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and unshakable. The crew stared at her, unsure whether to stop her, question her, or pray she was as skilled as she claimed. The runway stretched ahead like a gauntlet. Every second brought the storm closer, every gust of wind a reminder of the power they faced. She paused at the base of the aircraft, hand resting lightly on the fuselage. The engines hummed, dormant but ready to roar to life. She looked back at the passengers, some staring wide-eyed, others whispering to each other, their faces etched with fear. She could see their terror, but she could also see their hope, fragile, flickering, but undeniably there. Eleanor took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the sharp, wet scent of rain and ozone. Her mind raced through protocols, calculations, maneuvers she hadn't practiced in months, but instinct, muscle memory, and decades of training kicked in. She was ready. She had to be. There was no room for doubt. Captain Bradley approached, his face unreadable. "You ready for this?" he asked, voice low, almost inaudible over the storm's rising crescendo. Eleanor nodded once firmly. "Let's save them." And with that, she stepped toward the cockpit door, her hand poised to open it. Outside, the sky twisted and turned, lightning cracking dangerously close, winds howling as if mocking the audacity of a 68-year-old woman daring to defy nature itself. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether courage, skill, and determination could triumph over the raw, untamed fury of the hurricane. As the cockpit door swung open, Eleanor's silhouette framed against the storm's chaos, the terminal fell silent. Staff, passengers, and even the skeptical crew waited. No one could predict what would happen next. Would she fail? Would she succeed? Or would the hurricane prove that even decades of experience were no match for its wrath? The answer was about to reveal itself, and the first moments inside that cockpit would determine the fate of 60 lives. End with suspense. Would Eleanor's calm in the eye of chaos be enough to survive the storm? And could anyone truly believe a 68-year-old could tame a hurricane in a jetliner? The terminal was a mixture of panic and disbelief. Flight 219's passengers were restless, their anxiety compounded by the hurricane's unrelenting roar outside. Rain pelted the windows in heavy sheets, and the wind bent the aluminum signs lining the tarmac. Airport staff moved in tense, urgent motions, wringing their hands, checking radar updates, whispering predictions that never seemed optimistic enough. Inside this storm of fear, Eleanor Hayes moved like a calm force of nature, her eyes fixed on the jet. She adjusted her leather jacket, held her clipboard tighter, and walked toward the boarding bridge. Every step drew whispers, gasps, and incredulous stares. "Is she serious?" one flight attendant muttered to another. She can't be," said a young man, voice tight with doubt. She's. He gestured helplessly at Eleanor's silver hair, the slight stoop in her shoulders, the walking stick some older passengers might use. But Eleanor didn't look back. She wasn't concerned with what they thought. She was focused on the task at hand, 60 souls stranded on a runway with a hurricane looming, waiting for someone to take control. The boarding bridge creaked under the storm's assault, but Alina's steps were steady. Crew members followed hesitantly, unsure whether to stop her or simply let her lead. The captain, Marcus Bradley, trailed behind, tension etched deep in every line of his face. He had fought storms before, faced equipment failures mid-flight, and survived situations others would call impossible. But he had never seen a passenger, a senior citizen, no less, claim she could take the controls and actually save lives. As Alina reached the jet door, a gust of wind slammed against the fuselage. She paused, letting her eyes sweep the tarmac one final time. Pilots, crew, and passengers alike were watching, their expressions a mixture of skepticism, fear, and faint hope. She inhaled deeply, smelling the sharp tang of ozone from the storm outside, feeling it mingle with the scent of jet fuel. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. The flight attendants were still hesitant. "Ma'am," one said, trying to mask worry with authority, "I don't think." Alina cut her off gently yet firmly. "I've trained for this. Trust me, please." Her voice had no room for argument, no trace of doubt. It was commanding yet compassionate, a rare combination that made even the skeptical hesitate. Slowly, they moved aside. The cabin was tense, the murmur of passengers filling the air with anxious energy. Mothers held children close, gripping the armrests like lifelines. One young man whispered to his seatmate, "I can't believe this. She's going to fly us through a hurricane." Alina stepped into the aisle, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. She walked toward the cockpit with purpose, her every step a quiet defiance against the storm outside. The captain followed, silent, calculating. Every inch closer to the cockpit, the tension escalated. Every glance from a passenger carried an unspoken question. Could this woman really fly a 737 through Category 4 winds? Once inside the cockpit, Alina's eyes scanned the controls with the precision of someone who had spent decades memorizing every switch, gauge, and lever. She moved like a pianist about to perform the most intricate symphony, each hand poised to play a life-saving note. The captain stood behind her, skeptical yet desperate, watching every move. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's see what you've got. I'll handle takeoff clearance, but you're in charge of the plane." Alina nodded once, setting her clipboard aside. Her fingers hovered over the controls, feeling the cold metal, the textures she knew by heart. She checked the instruments in a fluid, practiced motion. Fuel levels, engine status, hydraulic systems. Everything seemed nominal, but she knew that numbers on a screen wouldn't stop the hurricane from trying to rip them apart. Outside, the storm's roar was deafening. Rain lashed the cockpit windows in rhythmic thuds, and lightning flared across the horizon in blinding flashes. Turbulence already buffeted the plane while it was still on the ground. Alina's stomach churned slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was what she had trained for, what her life had prepared her for. And yet, the stakes had never been higher. The captain gave a cautious nod. "Engage engines," he said. Alina turned the key. The engines hummed to life, vibrating through the fuselage, a low but powerful growl. The sound seemed to momentarily silence the chaos outside, though the storm was relentless. Passengers shifted nervously in their seats, some pressing faces to the windows, trying to see, trying to believe. "Ladies and gentlemen," the flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, "please remain calm. Flight 219 is preparing for takeoff. We ask for your cooperation as we navigate the storm." The words were formal, but the quiver beneath them betrayed the fear everyone felt. Alina's hands moved over the controls, running through pre-flight checks with meticulous precision. She adjusted flaps, checked engine output, confirmed autopilot systems, and ran through the emergency protocols in her mind. Each movement was deliberate, careful, and confident. She could feel the plane's energy beneath her, alive and restless, waiting to meet the storm. "Ready for taxi," she said to the captain, her voice steady, unwavering. He nodded. "Runway's yours." The plane began to inch forward. tires squealing against wet asphalt, visibility through the cockpit windows reduced to near zero. Alina adjusted the throttle, timing every movement to counter the gusts of wind that threatened to veer the plane off course. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers through the cockpit windows. Flight attendants braced themselves, gripping armrests, murmuring reassurances that barely reached the ears of those clutching each other in fear. Children whimpered, some crying silently, while parents whispered hurried prayers. The storm's howl seemed to seep into the cabin, a living, breathing entity testing Alina's nerve and skill. Alina's mind ran through every scenario, anticipating what the hurricane might throw at her. Gusts strong enough to tip the plane, turbulence that could rattle the fuselage, lightning close enough to interfere with instruments, every danger calculated and countered in fractions of a second. Her hands were steady, her breathing measured, every movement precise, every decision critical. The co-pilot, a young man barely 5 years into his career, leaned in, voice tight. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone handle this calmly," he admitted. "Even the captain is nervous." Alina spared him a glance. "Calm is all we have. Fear won't keep this plane in the air." Her words were not meant as a lecture, they were a shield, a reassurance. Outside, the hurricane's wrath intensified. Rain pounded harder, winds threatened to push the plane sideways, and the terminal's lights flickered in warning. Alina's eyes flicked to the radar, noting the storm's unpredictable patterns, calculating her takeoff angle, her speed, her climb. Every second was precious. Every choice carried consequences that would ripple through 60 lives. And then, just as the engines reached full throttle and the plane began its tentative roll down the runway, a deafening gust slammed the fuselage sideways. The plane swayed violently, tires fighting for traction on the wet asphalt. Passengers gasped, some shrieking, others frozen in disbelief. The storm seemed to mock them, a living challenge daring anyone to claim mastery over it. Alina's hands gripped the yoke tighter. "Steady," she whispered, not to anyone but to herself. She felt the jet respond beneath her, alive, obedient to skill, instinct, and experience. She had faced turbulence before, storms that seemed impossibly violent, but nothing like this. Lightning struck nearby, a blinding flash that made the world momentarily white. The terminal's windows rattled, and even the most skeptical passengers stared, their fear mingling with awe as they realized the woman at the controls wasn't flinching. The plane swayed again, dangerously close to the edge of the runway. Alina corrected with subtle, precise movements, coaxing it back in line. Every second stretched into an eternity, every heartbeat matched by the engine's roar and the hurricane's fury. Captain Bradley swallowed hard. "If she does this, if she actually takes off, she's either a genius or a miracle," he muttered under his breath. And then, with a final surge of power, Flight 219 inched past the halfway mark of the runway, engines screaming, wings cutting through rain-soaked air. Passengers clutched their armrests, wide-eyed, whispering prayers, holding each other close. The storm had not yet yielded. The hurricane's rage continued to batter them, testing every nerve, every ounce of skill Alina had spent a lifetime developing. The moment the wheels left the runway, the world shifted violently. Flight 219 lurched upward, wings struggling against the fierce gusts that tried to wrest the plane from the sky. Rain hammered the fuselage like thousands of tiny hammers, windows streaked with sheets of water that blurred the storm into a white-gray swirl of fury. Inside the cockpit, Alina Hayes's hands were steady, but every nerve in her body was alive with adrenaline. She could feel the plane's muscles beneath her fingers, the engines humming, the hydraulics straining, the metal vibrating as though alive. The co-pilot, young and pale, gripped the edge of his seat. "This is unreal," he muttered. "I've never felt anything like this." Alina's eyes flicked to the instruments, scanning numbers and readouts with the precision of someone who had memorized every gauge, every warning light. "We're stable," she said, voice low but unwavering, "for now. Keep monitoring the flaps and engine pressure." Captain Bradley sat behind her, a mixture of awe and disbelief crossing his face. He had flown through storms before, had faced near disasters, mechanical failures, and emergency landings, but nothing like this. The hurricane outside was an entity unto itself, violent, unpredictable, and relentless. And yet, Eleanor's calm radiated through the cockpit, a silent force of control. Outside, the storm's wrath intensified. Winds gusted unpredictably, hitting the plane from every angle, tilting it violently, sending it swaying as if the sky itself were trying to pitch them into the ocean below. Lightning struck the clouds nearby, illuminating the trembling wings in harsh white light. The plane bucked in the air, tossing passengers violently against their restraints. Some screamed, some prayed, and some were frozen, staring wide-eyed at the shaking cabin. Eleanor spoke softly but firmly, issuing commands with a calm authority that carried through the roar of the engines. "Flaps 20, throttle steady, adjust heading 3 degrees left, we'll bank into the gust." Every word was deliberate, every command precise. Her decades of experience had taught her that panic was the enemy and precision was salvation. The co-pilot swallowed hard. She's actually doing it," he whispered. "She's keeping us in the air." The plane jolted violently again as a particularly fierce gust slammed into the fuselage. The metal groaned under pressure. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the yoke, muscles straining, eyes narrowing. Her mind raced through contingencies. What if an engine failed? What if the landing gear couldn't handle the turbulence? What if the storm's fury increased before they could escape its center? Cabin attendants struggled to maintain composure. One woman, gripping the overhead rail, whispered a prayer under her breath. Children whimpered in terror, pressed against parents. The plane shuddered with each gust, and passengers braced themselves, eyes wide, hearts racing. Eleanor's focus never wavered. She adjusted the throttle incrementally, compensating for the unpredictable turbulence. She anticipated every gust, every swing of wind, every microshift in the plane's center of gravity. It was a dance with a deadly partner, and one misstep could send the aircraft tumbling into the storm's heart. Captain Bradley cleared his throat, voice tense. "We're nearing the upper limit for safety. At this altitude, structural stress could." "Focus on the instruments," Eleanor interrupted, voice calm, commanding. "We'll climb another 1,000 feet to stabilize. Follow my lead." The captain hesitated but followed. The co-pilot mirrored Eleanor's movements, adjusting throttle and flaps under her guidance. Outside, rain pelted the windows with even greater ferocity. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, illuminating the cabin in harsh, momentary brilliance. The plane's wings flexed, almost bending under the strain, and a shudder ran through the fuselage. "Brace for turbulence," Eleanor called, her voice calm yet urgent. The plane bucked violently, tossing passengers in their seats. Screams echoed through the cabin. The storm was testing every inch of skill, every ounce of nerve she possessed. For Eleanor, each second was a calculation. She considered wind speed, angle of attack, weight distribution, fuel consumption, and the unpredictable nature of hurricane-force gusts. Her mind raced, but her movements were methodical, practiced, unerring. She was not guessing. She was executing a lifetime of preparation distilled into every subtle adjustment. The co-pilot's eyes were wide, sweat dripping down his forehead. I don't understand how she's keeping us level," he whispered. "She knows what she's doing," Captain Bradley admitted, voice low. "It's incredible." Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently. A bolt of lightning struck dangerously close, sending a blinding flash of white through the cockpit. Instruments flickered briefly, alarms beeped, and the plane twisted slightly in the air. Eleanor reacted instantly, countering the tilt, adjusting the flaps and ailerons with precision. Her heart pounded, but her mind was razor-sharp. "Steady," she murmured. "We can ride this out, trust me." The cabin rattled again as the storm pushed against them with renewed force. Passengers clutched armrests, some silent, some crying. Alina's calm radiated outward, an invisible tether connecting every crew member, every passenger to the rhythm of her control. Her hands moved over the yoke and throttle with a confidence that defied her age, defied the storm, and defied every doubt cast by those who had laughed at her mere presence. Outside, visibility was nearly zero. Rain streaked sideways in sheets, and the wind threatened to twist the plane off course. The storm's roar filled every gap in sound, drowning the engines, drowning the panic, demanding attention. Alina's eyes scanned instruments, radar, and the turbulent sky beyond the cockpit windows. She calculated, anticipated, and acted with an efficiency that only years of experience could produce. "We're not out of this yet," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Keep it steady. We have to make it past the eye." Captain Bradley, sweating intense, nodded. The eye. Alina's eyes flicked toward the radar. A faint gap in the storm appeared, a swirling calm in the heart of chaos. "If we can get through the eye," she explained, "we'll have a few critical minutes to stabilize and prepare for descent. But it's risky. One wrong maneuver and we could be lost." The co-pilot swallowed hard. "We've got to trust her," he said, voice barely audible over the storm. "It's the only chance we have." The plane shuddered violently again, the metal groaning in protest. Lightning flashed, closer than before. Rain pelted the fuselage like bullets. Passengers screamed, some sobbed, and yet, despite the chaos, Alina's presence remained a calm eye amidst the storm. Her hands were firm on the controls, her eyes unblinking, mind calculating. She was not fighting fear, she was using it, converting it into precision, focus, and control. And then, just as the plane leveled for a brief instant, the storm hit again with renewed fury. Winds twisted the fuselage, shaking passengers violently in their seats. Instruments flashed red warnings, alarms shrieked. Alina's hands moved in a fluid, instinctive rhythm, countering, adjusting, anticipating. She was not just flying the plane, she was battling the hurricane itself. Passengers gripped each other, some whispering desperate prayers, some silent with disbelief. Children whimpered softly, heads buried in parents' shoulders. Cabin attendants held on, some trembling, some muttering encouragement under their breath. The storm's power was unrelenting, a monstrous reminder of nature's supremacy. And yet Alina Hayes, 68, laughed at none of it. Her focus, her experience, her skill were unyielding. She was a force in the storm, a beacon of calm, a calculated defiance against the chaos surrounding them. Every gust, every strike of lightning, every violent sway was met with a controlled, deliberate response. She was alive, aware, and entirely in command. The plane trembled violently as Alina Hayes guided it down the runway. The storm had not relented. It had only grown more aggressive, as if testing her will, mocking her audacity. Rain pounded the fuselage in relentless sheets, and gusts of wind threatened to push the aircraft sideways with terrifying force. The tarmac itself seemed to heave under the hurricane's wrath, slick with water and debris. Every inch mattered. Every movement of the yoke, every tap of a throttle could spell life or death for the 60 passengers on board. Inside the cockpit, Alina's fingers danced across the controls with precision and authority. Her eyes flicked from instrument to horizon, reading the storm as though it were a familiar map. Captain Bradley watched from the co-pilot's seat, a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief on his face. He had piloted through hurricanes before, yes, but he had never witnessed someone navigate such chaos with this level of calm, control, and raw intuition. "Steady," Alina whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We're not giving this storm anything it wants." The plane swayed violently as a gust struck from the left. Alina countered immediately, banking slightly into the wind, adjusting throttle and flaps in perfect synchrony. The engines roared, straining against the storm's fury. Every vibration, every shudder was fed back into her senses, every subtle movement of the aircraft analyzed in milliseconds. It was a dance, a deadly dance, with the hurricane as a relentless partner. The co-pilot swallowed hard, voice barely audible over the cacophony of wind and engines. I don't understand how she's doing this." "She's in command," Captain Bradley said quietly, almost to himself. We just follow her lead. Passengers in the cabin braced for the worst. Some clutched each other in terror, others stared wide-eyed, unsure whether to scream or pray. One child, no more than 6, buried his face in his mother's shoulder, whimpering. Another man's knuckles were white on the armrest, jaw clenched tight. And yet through the cabin a strange tension formed, not pure panic but a fragile thread of hope, tenuous and almost imperceptible. Outside, the storm's wrath continued. Lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the plane's wings in harsh white light. Wind slammed into the fuselage at impossible angles, tilting it, testing its structure. Alina adjusted the ailerons, throttling carefully to keep the plane aligned. She could feel the subtle shifts in pressure, the pull of gravity against the mass of metal and fuel, and she responded instantly, instinctively. Every second was critical. Every correction mattered. "Flaps 25, she commanded softly, eyes still on instruments. "Maintain thrust at 95%. We'll bank slightly right to counter the gust." Captain Bradley nodded, following her instructions, his voice taut with tension. "This is incredible. She's actually controlling this." A particularly fierce gust slammed into the plane, throwing it sideways. The fuselage groaned. Alina's jaw tightened. Sweat ran down her temple, but her hands never wavered. She corrected with minute adjustments, microseconds of precision that would have been impossible without her decades of experience. The plane responded, slowly, obediently, as if recognizing the authority in her movements. The runway stretched ahead, barely visible through sheets of rain and howling wind. Alina's mind raced, calculating speed, angle of ascent, timing, and trajectory. Every fraction of a second counted. Every gust of wind was a variable, every lightning strike a potential hazard. She ran through contingencies in her mind, every scenario rehearsed and accounted for. "Cabin secure?" she asked, voice calm but commanding. Flight attendants nodded quickly. "All passengers strapped in," one replied, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line. Alina adjusted throttle again. The plane surged forward, engines screaming, tires fighting for traction on the wet asphalt. Rain lashed at the cockpit windows, visibility almost zero. Lightning flashed again, closer, illuminating terrified faces through the cabin windows. She felt the plane respond beneath her hands, every vibration, every shudder feeding into her calculation. "Hold steady," she whispered. "We're almost there." The plane hit a particularly violent patch of wind. It lurched violently to the left, and passengers gasped in unison. Alina reacted instantly, banking into the gust, adjusting thrust, shifting flaps. The co-pilot struggled to keep up, following her lead, hands trembling. Captain Bradley gritted his teeth, gripping the seat, watching in awe. The plane's wheels clawed at the wet tarmac as they approached the halfway mark of the runway. Another violent gust slammed into the fuselage. Alina's knuckles whitened on the controls, her body tense, yet her mind remained razor-sharp. She made a split-second decision to increase thrust slightly, banking into the wind to maintain alignment. The engines roared even louder, carrying the plane forward inch by inch toward the edge of the runway. Passengers clutched armrests, eyes wide, some silently sobbing, others whispering prayers. The storm's roar filled every gap of sound, demanding their attention, testing their courage. Alina's calm, though, radiated through the cockpit, seeping into the cabin like a quiet shield against panic. She was alive, fully aware, every movement precise and deliberate. A bolt of lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the plane and the raging storm. Alina adjusted the yoke in a subtle motion, micro-correcting the plane's tilt. The fuselage groaned under the pressure, tires squealing against the wet tarmac. Every fiber of the aircraft protested against the storm. Every gust was a challenge, every second a fight for control. Captain Bradley swallowed hard. "If we make it past the end of this runway, I can't even imagine," his voice trailed off. "Focus," Alina said firmly. "The runway is our battlefield. We win this, we live. We lose, we don't get another chance." The plane neared the end of the runway, engines screaming, wings flexing against violent gusts. Alina's hands guided it with a masterful precision, anticipating every turbulence, every pull of the hurricane, every moment of chaos. The plane surged forward almost at the edge, and then with one final burst of power lifted into the air. Passengers erupted into a mixture of screams and gasps, some sobbing, some laughing through tears. The plane was airborne, but the battle was far from over. Alina's calm remained unshaken, eyes locked on instruments, hands dancing over controls, mind calculating the next moves. The storm was not done. Rain lashed sideways, wind threatened to toss the plane like a toy, and lightning flashed around them in blinding brilliance. Alina had won the first battle, taking Flight 219 into the air, but the war against the hurricane was only beginning. "Hold her steady," she commanded. "We've made it off the runway, but we're not safe yet, not by far." Captain Bradley exhaled slowly, tension in every muscle. I can't believe what I'm seeing. She's extraordinary." The co-pilot, hands trembling, echoed, "We're actually flying. We're alive." And yet outside, the hurricane's fury continued to howl. The plane bucked violently as another gust struck, throwing passengers against their restraints. Alina's focus never wavered. She was calm, methodical, a rock in the storm, and yet even she knew the next moments would test her skill like never before. The plane shuddered violently as it fought through the hurricane's relentless grip. Alina Hayes's eyes were locked on the radar, her hands steady on the yoke, every movement deliberate, every calculation precise. The violent gusts ripped at the fuselage, twisting Flight 219 with brute force, but she countered instinctively, banking, throttling, flaring, turning chaos into controlled motion. Sweat ran down her temple, mixing with the rain streaking the cockpit windows, but her focus never faltered. Every passenger, every crew member, every ounce of life in that aircraft depended on her decisions, her courage, and her skill. The co-pilot leaned forward, jaw tight, voice trembling. "I've never felt anything like this. We're in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane." Alina didn't look at him. She didn't need to. "I know," she said calmly. "Stay with me, eyes on instruments, listen to me and we'll make it." Captain Bradley gritted his teeth. "You're calm, almost too calm. This is insane. We shouldn't even be alive right now." Alina's eyes flicked to him, sharp and commanding. "Then stop thinking about fear. Focus on survival. That's all that matters." The radar displayed a swirling mass of fury. Clouds collided like monstrous waves, lightning striking in chaotic flashes, wind gusts threatening to rip the plane from the sky. Yet amid the chaos, Alina spotted it, a faint break in the storm, a circular calm that shimmered like an oasis of stillness. The eye of the hurricane. "Captain," she said quietly, pointing to the radar. "There, the eye. If we can reach it, we'll have a few critical minutes to stabilize and plan our descent." The captain's eyes widened. That's just a temporary calm. We've got to be ready. One misstep and..." Alina nodded. "I know, but it's our only chance. Hold her steady, trust me." The co-pilot's hand shook as he mirrored Alina's precise movements. He had never imagined a passenger, let alone a 68-year-old woman, could command a jet through this level of chaos with such mastery. But the proof was in the plane's response. Flight 219 was alive under Alina's hands, defying the hurricane's wrath. Passengers felt the turbulence lessen slightly, though the storm still roared around them. A fragile sense of relief rippled through the cabin, replaced quickly by awe and disbelief. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers gripped armrests, and children peeked through fingers at the wet, gray world outside. Some dared to look at Alina, who, despite the sweat and tension, remained a calm, unshakable figure at the controls. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, illuminating the cockpit in stark white. Alina adjusted throttle and flaps with split-second precision, banking gently into the wind. The plane shuddered, groaning, wings flexing under the storm's assault, but her calculated movements kept Flight 219 steady. "Almost there," she whispered, eyes narrowing. "Hold steady, steady, steady." The plane began to enter the outer edge of the eye. The violent gusts subsided slightly, though the turbulence still rocked the fuselage. Passengers could now hear the faint whine of the engines without the overwhelming roar of the hurricane. A momentary calm, a deceptive tranquility, settled over the aircraft, offering a fragile respite. Flight attendants exchanged cautious glances. "Is it safe?" one whispered, though the answer was clearly no, not completely. Aliner's calm was the only thing keeping the cabin from descending into fear. The co-pilot's voice trembled. "We're actually in the eye. It's beautiful in a terrifying way." Aliner didn't respond. Her eyes scanned instruments, reading the plane's response, calculating fuel, wind shifts, and the trajectory required for the next phase. This temporary calm was their chance, but it was also a trap. One wrong move, one lapse in concentration, and the hurricane's fury would strike again. She exhaled slowly, muscles tense. "Fuel levels are stable, engines holding. We've got maybe 5 minutes, maybe less, before the storm hits again. That's all the time we get to prepare for descent. Concentrate. Every second counts." Captain Bradley leaned in, voice tight. "Aliner, if you pull this off, I don't even know what words exist to describe it." She glanced at him briefly, eyes sharp. "We're not done yet. Don't get sentimental now. Focus on the plane." The plane floated in the eye like a fragile leaf in a swirling maelstrom. Outside, clouds twisted violently, but inside, for the first time since takeoff, the turbulence lessened. Passengers felt the slight relief, though fear was never fully gone. They trusted her instinctively, though they barely knew her. Somehow, she had commanded not just the aircraft, but the confidence of 60 strangers facing the unrelenting wrath of nature. Aliner's mind worked at lightning speed. The descent had to be calculated perfectly. Approach angle, wind shift, runway distance, speed, weight distribution. All variables had to align. A moment's miscalculation could send them into a catastrophic spin. "Listen carefully," she said, voice calm but commanding. "We're going to descend. Stay strapped in. Keep your seatbelts tight. Crew, prepare for turbulence. This next phase is critical. We have 5 minutes to make it smooth, or we risk everything." Lightning struck near the eye's edge, illuminating the plane's wings in brilliant white flashes. Aliner's hands were steady, her body tense but controlled. She adjusted the throttle incrementally, checking instruments with trained precision. The plane responded like an extension of her own body, obeying her commands as if recognizing the authority she wielded. Captain Bradley exhaled, tension etched into every line of his face. "I can't believe we made it this far. The eye, it's a small miracle." "Miracles aren't real," Aliner said, voice tight with focus. "Skill is, experience is, nerves of steel, and the will to survive." The co-pilot nodded, awestruck. "Then we're lucky to have all three in one person." The plane hovered for a tense moment in the eye, a fragile bubble of calm amid chaos. Outside, the storm still raged, waiting to reclaim its fury. Aliner knew the calm was temporary. The real test, the descent, the battle to land safely, was just ahead. "Eyes on instruments," she warned. "Prepare for the eye wall, the real storm is coming. We have maybe 3 minutes before it hits. Concentrate. Steady, steady, steady." The engines hummed steadily, a low, reassuring growl under her hands. The plane's wings flexed gently, responding to micro-adjustments she made instinctively. Every passenger held their breath, knowing the eye was the calm before the storm, and the storm would strike with vengeance. Lightning flashed outside again, closer, illuminating terrified faces through the cabin windows. Aliner's eyes narrowed, calculating, adjusting, preparing. The plane had survived the first phase, but the hurricane's wrath was far from over. The brief calm of the eye was a fragile illusion. Aliner Hayes tightened her grip on the yoke, scanning instruments, calculating every variable with razor-sharp focus. She knew it wouldn't last. The outer wall of the hurricane, the eye wall, was waiting. A colossal wall of wind, rain, and chaos ready to tear the plane from the sky. She could feel the tension in every rivet, every joint, every fiber of Flight 219, as if the aircraft itself was bracing for impact. Captain Bradley's voice broke through the radio chatter, taut with concern. "We're approaching the eye wall. Brace for extreme turbulence." Alina didn't flinch. "Steady," she commanded, voice calm but unyielding. "Adjust heading 10 degrees right. Increase throttle incrementally. Bank into the gusts. We ride this or we risk everything." The plane lurched violently. Rain struck like needles against the fuselage. Lightning split the clouds around them, bright enough to cast sharp shadows across the cabin. Wind screamed through the engines, each gust threatening to tilt the plane beyond control. The plane's wings flexed under incredible pressure, but Alina countered with instinctive, precise adjustments. Passengers screamed, clutching armrests and each other. Children whimpered softly. Flight attendants braced themselves, trying to maintain composure in the maelstrom. Every human on board felt the power of the hurricane, yet none could deny the calm authority of the woman at the controls. "Flaps 30, Alina said softly. "Throttle at 90%. Steady, steady." The co-pilot's hands shook. She's actually keeping us level. I've never seen anything like this." Captain Bradley swallowed hard. "She's extraordinary, but the storm—" His words were cut off by a violent lurch. A gust slammed into the fuselage from the left, spinning the plane slightly. Alina reacted instantly, banking into the wind, adjusting throttle, leveling the plane with millimeter precision. The engines roared in protest, the fuselage groaning under the strain. Passengers gasped, eyes wide with terror. Some whispered frantic prayers, others clutched each other in stunned silence. "Brace for turbulence," Alina warned, voice cutting through the roar of wind and engines. The plane bucked violently, tossing passengers against their restraints. Overhead bins rattled. Flight attendants held onto rails, shouting instructions above the storm. Alina's knuckles whitened, but her movements were deliberate, controlled. Every micro-adjustment kept the plane airborne. Every split-second decision mattered. Captain Bradley leaned in, voice strained. "Alina, how are you doing this? This is insane." "Focus," she replied, eyes locked on the radar. "The plane is an extension of my hands. Every gust, every strike of lightning, every turbulence, we anticipate it, we counter it. That's all we can do. Stay sharp." Lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the cockpit and cabin in stark white. The plane swayed violently, wings flexing as the fuselage groaned. Alina adjusted flaps and ailerons with precision, micro-correcting every tilt. The storm outside was relentless, punishing, yet the aircraft responded obediently under her hands. "Wind shear detected, left side strong," the co-pilot shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Bank into it. Maintain climb rate. Do not overcorrect," Alina commanded, calm but precise. "We're still in control, but only just. Anticipate, adjust, hold steady." The plane shook violently again as the hurricane slammed into them with renewed force. Rain lashed the windows, the fuselage twisting under pressure. Passengers screamed, some crying, some clinging desperately to their loved ones. The roar of the storm was deafening, a living force challenging every ounce of skill and courage Alina possessed. Captain Bradley gritted his teeth. "If she keeps this up, we might actually survive this." The co-pilot's hands were white-knuckled on the controls. "We're barely hanging on," he muttered. "One mistake, one." "Focus," Alina snapped, eyes blazing with concentration. "No mistakes, every movement counts. Trust your instincts, trust the plane, trust me." The plane lurched again as the eye wall's fury struck with full force. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the roar of wind made conversation almost impossible. The engines howled, straining against the hurricane. Alina adjusted thrust and flaps in microseconds, banking, leveling, countering every gust, every tilt, every violent shift. Passengers clung to life in silence or terrified screams. Flight attendants held onto rails, shouting instructions. Mothers whispered reassurances to children who whimpered, their eyes wide with fear. Fathers gripped seats, hearts pounding. Every soul on board depended on Alina's skill, courage, and unflinching resolve. "Throttle 50%, Alina said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Bank slightly left. We ride the turbulence. Focus on instruments, not panic." Captain Bradley nodded, gripping his seat. "She's controlling it. She's actually controlling it." The co-pilot's eyes widened in disbelief. "I don't understand how this is possible. She's amazing." The plane shuddered violently again. A bolt of lightning struck near the wingtip, illuminating terrified faces in the cabin. Alina's jaw tightened. Every movement was critical. Every decision mattered. She adjusted the controls, micro-correcting the plane's position in the storm. Minutes stretched like hours. Every second was a battle for survival. Alina's focus never wavered. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with rain streaking the cockpit windows. The storm's fury tested every skill, every ounce of courage she possessed, yet she remained unflinching. Outside, the hurricane's wrath showed no mercy. Wind gusts battered the fuselage, rain pummeled windows, and lightning struck dangerously close. The plane shuddered under the assault, wings flexing, engines roaring, every system strained to its limit. Alina adjusted throttle and flaps, banking, leveling, countering. She was the calm in the storm, the guiding hand keeping 60 lives airborne. Every passenger felt the tension, the fear, the awe. They knew survival depended on her skill, her courage, and her unyielding focus. "Keep her steady," she whispered, voice almost a prayer. "We've made it this far. We can survive this, but we have to hold tight. Every second counts." Captain Bradley exhaled, tension etched into every line of his face. If she keeps this up, she could actually save us all. The plane bucked again as the storm's fury reached a crescendo. Lightning flashed, rain lashed, and the fuselage groaned under the strain. Alina adjusted the yoke, throttling with precision, micro-correcting every tilt. Passengers clutched each other, whispered prayers, or cried silently. Flight attendants shouted above the storm, guiding passengers, bracing themselves. Every soul on board was acutely aware of the hurricane's power and the incredible skill keeping them alive. The eye wall had passed, but the storm's fury was far from over. Alina Hayes tightened her grip on the yoke, her knuckles white, muscles taut, eyes locked on the instruments. Outside, rain pelted the fuselage in unrelenting sheets, lightning cracking the sky with brilliant flashes, illuminating the aircraft in stark white. Wind gusts threatened to tear the plane sideways, every vibration of the fuselage echoing like a warning. The hurricane had tested her every skill, every instinct, and now, as Flight 219 began its descent, the stakes rose higher than ever. Captain Bradley's voice broke through the storm, taut with concern. "Alina, the runway is barely visible through this storm. Visibility is near zero. Are you sure we can?" "Focus," she said sharply, eyes narrowing. "We're not done yet, all systems nominal. Instruments are stable. We've got this. Stay with me." The co-pilot's hands trembled as he mirrored her precise movements. I don't even know how to do this. You're amazing." "I'm not amazing," Alina replied, voice calm but firm. "I'm prepared, that's what matters." The descent was a precarious dance with death. Alina adjusted throttle and flaps in microseconds, compensating for violent gusts that threatened to pitch the plane into chaos. The wind pushed the fuselage like a toy, yet every adjustment she made kept Flight 219 airborne. She was the eye of the storm inside the cockpit, a force of calm and control amidst the hurricane's wrath. Passengers clutched each other, whispered prayers, or stared wide-eyed through rain-streaked windows. Flight attendants held onto rails, shouting instructions above the roar of engines and wind. Every soul on board knew their survival depended entirely on Alina's skill and composure. Lightning struck near the wings, the flash blinding. The plane shook violently, groaning under pressure. Eleanor's hands moved in a fluid, instinctive rhythm, micro-correcting the plane's tilt, balancing thrust, flaps, and ailerons. Every second was a battle for survival, every movement critical. "Bank into gust," she instructed, voice steady. "Increase thrust slightly, maintain descent rate, focus on instruments, not panic." Captain Bradley followed, tension etched into every line of his face. "We're barely holding it together. One wrong move." "No wrong moves," Eleanor said firmly. "Every correction counts, every second matters. Trust the plane, trust yourself, trust me." The runway came into view, a faint streak of lights blurred by rain and wind. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her focus never wavered. This was the final act, the culmination of every second, every decision, every ounce of skill. The plane needed a perfect landing, and every gust, every strike of lightning was a test of nerve and precision. The co-pilot swallowed hard. It's visible barely. Can we make it?" "We will," Eleanor said, voice calm, commanding. "But we need precision. Nothing else matters." The storm battered the fuselage with renewed fury. Rain struck the windows like bullets. Wind gusts threatened to twist the plane off course. The engine screamed, vibrating through the fuselage. Eleanor's hands were steady, her eyes focused, every movement deliberate, every calculation precise. Passengers gripped armrests, clinging to life in tense silence. Mothers whispered prayers to children, fathers held tightly to seats, some silently weeping, others wide-eyed with disbelief. Every heart on board was synchronized with the plane's struggle, every breath tied to Eleanor's skill. "Flaps 40, she instructed, throttle steady at 90%, prepare for final approach. Eyes on instruments, do not panic." Captain Bradley's voice was taut with tension. "We're in position, barely. Are you ready?" "Always," she replied, "but focus. One misstep now and all of this, the storm, the lives, we could lose everything." The co-pilot's hands trembled. "I've never seen anyone handle a descent like this. You're a miracle." "I'm not a miracle," Eleanor said, voice firm. "I'm experience, skill, and nerves of steel. That's what keeps planes in the air, not luck." Lightning flashed again, striking dangerously close. The plane swayed violently. Eleanor micro-corrected, banking into the gust, adjusting throttle and flaps with precise timing. Every second was a battle against the storm, every micro-adjustment a life-saving decision. The runway lights grew larger, a beacon of hope amid chaos. Rain reduced visibility to nearly nothing. Gusts threatened to throw the plane off balance with every second. Eleanor adjusted throttle incrementally, keeping the descent steady but rapid enough to land safely. "Prepare for flare," she said, voice calm, almost serene. "We're moments from touchdown. Hold steady, steady, steady." The plane's wheels hit the runway with a violent thud, bouncing slightly on the wet asphalt. Passengers screamed, clinging to seats, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Eleanor kept the plane aligned, countering gusts, adjusting flaps and throttle with meticulous precision. The engines roared in protest, but she maintained control. "Brake gently," she instructed. "Reverse thrust ready, keep her straight, focus." The co-pilot mirrored her movements, hands shaking, voice tight. Captain Bradley gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the instruments. The plane skidded slightly on the slick runway, wings flexing under the stress, but Eleanor's adjustments kept it on course. The fuselage trembled as water pooled under the wheels, spray hissing violently. Every second was a battle against the storm, against gravity, against chaos itself. Yet the plane moved steadily down the runway, inching toward safety with calculated precision. Passengers held their breath, some sobbing, some whispering prayers, some screaming with relief. The cabin was tense, alive with emotion, every heartbeat synchronized with the plane's struggle. Eleanor's calm presence was the anchor keeping them tethered to hope. Finally, the plane slowed, reverse thrust engaged. tires gripping wet asphalt. The engines roared as they fought against the residual gusts, the plane's momentum carrying them toward safety. Alina's hands were steady, adjustments precise, mind focused on every variable, every risk, every life on board. The plane finally came to a complete stop. Silence fell briefly, broken only by the hiss of rain and engines. Passengers exhaled collectively, tears streaming, hands gripping loved ones, disbelief and relief mingling in equal measure. Alina Hayes remained calm, but the tension in her body eased slightly as she realized the first impossible hurdle had been cleared. Captain Bradley exhaled slowly, voice hoarse. You did it, all of them alive. I can't believe it." The co-pilot's voice trembled. We actually survived." Alina's hands relaxed slightly on the controls. She allowed herself a brief exhale, eyes scanning the runway and instruments. The storm was still raging outside, but Flight 219 was finally safe, grounded, and intact. 60 lives had survived against impossible odds. Passengers erupted into a mixture of cheers, sobs, and applause. Flight attendants hugged each other, some weeping openly. Mothers clutched children, fathers clasped hands, and strangers embraced, united in the shared miracle of survival. Alina, however, remained composed, her calm presence a testament to skill, experience, and unwavering courage. But even as the applause filled the cabin, Alina's eyes flicked to the storm outside. The hurricane had not fully released its grip. She knew that the challenge was not yet over. The descent had been successful, but nature's fury was still present, waiting to test anyone who dared confront it. The rain still pelted Flight 219 as it taxied slowly down the runway. Outside, the hurricane's fury roared, gusts whipping the aircraft like a toy, lightning cracking the sky in violent bursts. But inside the cockpit, Alina Hayes remained the eye of calm, her hands steady, her mind focused, her experience guiding every movement. She had brought the plane down safely, but her job was not yet complete. The engines still had to be shut down, the passengers safely disembarked, and the storm's remaining challenges carefully navigated. Captain Bradley's voice broke the tense silence. "Alina, I don't even know what to say, you." "Focus on securing the cabin," Alina interrupted gently but firmly. "We're not out of this yet. One misstep and we risk more than just pride. Safety first, always." The co-pilot nodded, hands still trembling but following her instructions. "Cabin secure?" he asked quietly, almost afraid to hope. Flight attendants confirmed in hushed, tense voices. All passengers seated, seatbelts tight, nothing loose. Alina exhaled slowly. She moved through the final procedures with precision, throttle adjustments, engine checks, control surfaces stabilized. Every system responded under her touch, each command executed flawlessly. She had faced the storm's wrath in the air, and now she faced the final test on the runway and in the taxiing. Passengers, still gripping armrests or holding their loved ones, looked around at one another. There was disbelief, relief, and an overwhelming sense of awe. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers held their children closer, and children, still wide-eyed, finally dared to peek out the windows at the storm-tossed world. They had survived the impossible. But Alina knew the danger wasn't entirely gone. Even a powerful storm could have hidden hazards, flooded sections of runway debris, or sudden gusts that could destabilize the plane. Her eyes flicked constantly between instruments and horizon, calculating every possible risk. "Bring her to a complete stop," she instructed, "and hold the brakes steady. Reverse thrust only as needed." Captain Bradley exhaled, jaw tight. "We're still in the storm. This is incredible. I've never—" "Do not celebrate yet," Alina interrupted, calm but firm. "This isn't over until the last passenger is safe." The plane skidded slightly on the wet tarmac, tires hissing against the water. Alina adjusted subtly, countering gusts with micro-corrections. The aircraft obeyed, steady, precise. Every second was a reminder that the storm had not surrendered its power, but the plane and its pilot were more determined. Passengers began to murmur, some tears streaming, some hands pressed together in prayer. They looked at one another, whispering disbelief and gratitude. Alina, however, remained focused. She had navigated the storm, but every second still mattered. Every life still depended on her attention. Engage parking brake, she instructed. Cut engines slowly. Keep an eye on the controls. Prepare for evacuation if needed. The co-pilot followed her commands, hands steady now, voice barely above a whisper. Captain Bradley exhaled, tension etched into every line of his face. You actually did it, he said. All 60 lives. Alina nodded, eyes scanning instruments. It's not over until everyone is safely off the plane. Flight attendants moved quickly, opening doors, guiding passengers to exit carefully in the downpour. Mothers carried children. Fathers helped the elderly. Strangers assisted each other across puddles and debris-strewn tarmac. The storm was still furious, but Alina's calm, decisive actions had given them a fighting chance. One passenger, a young woman gripping a child tightly, looked back at the plane, eyes wide. Who flew this?" she asked, voice trembling. Alina Hayes emerged from the cockpit, soaked, exhausted, yet composed. She gave a small nod, acknowledging the disbelief, the awe, the gratitude that surrounded her. "We did it," she said softly, though it was clear the words encompassed more than herself. "Everyone is safe." Captain Bradley stepped forward, voice trembling. "Alina, 60 lives. You saved them all. I don't even know what to say. They laughed when you said you could fly it, and now." Alina allowed herself a small, tired smile. "They didn't have to believe me. I just had to believe in what I could do. That's enough." The co-pilot, still pale and shaken, nodded. I'll never forget this. You saved us all. I don't know how to thank you." Outside, the storm's rain still fell in sheets, gusts shaking the tarmac, but inside, the tension had shifted to relief, awe, and a deep, unshakable gratitude. Passengers hugged, cried, laughed, and whispered stories of survival. They had been witnesses to something extraordinary. News crews began to arrive as word spread. Helicopters hovered, reporters shouted over the wind, capturing images of the soaked plane, the still raging storm, and the faces of passengers and crew. But the world's focus quickly turned to Alina Hayes, the 68-year-old who had claimed she could fly the plane, who had taken command in impossible circumstances, and who had guided Flight 219 safely through a hurricane's wrath. Interviews followed. Passengers described her calm authority, her precision, her courage. Flight attendants spoke of her steady presence amidst terror. Captain Bradley and the co-pilot both recounted her skill and focus, unable to put into words the magnitude of what they had witnessed. And yet Alina remained humble. She did not claim heroism. She did not bask in fame. She had done what she had always done in her life, relied on skill, experience, and focus to protect others. She had flown the plane through chaos, and she had saved lives. That was enough. As the sun began to break through the storm clouds, casting a muted golden light across the tarmac, passengers filed toward buses and ambulances, still talking in hushed tones about the miracle they had lived through. Alina stood beside the plane, soaked, exhausted, but steady. She watched the people she had saved, feeling a quiet, deep satisfaction. For 60 lives, the world had changed in a few terrifying hours. Families had survived, children had been protected, and strangers had been united by fear, courage, and survival. And at the center of it all stood Alina Hayes, a testament to the power of experience, focus, and an unshakable belief in one's own skill. One young passenger, gripping her mother's hand, approached Alina shyly. You saved us," he whispered. "Thank you." Alina knelt slightly, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You helped too," she said softly. "You all did. Courage is contagious. Never forget that." The storm slowly began to abate, but its memory lingered, a reminder of the force of nature and the fragility of life. Eleanor had faced it head-on, guided Flight 219 safely, and emerged not only as a hero, but as a living proof that skill, courage, and determination could defy impossible odds. As helicopters circled above, news crews swarmed, and passengers recounted their stories, Eleanor Hayes stepped back, letting the world recognize her bravery. She had done what few could, what most would have deemed impossible, and she had done it with grace, precision, and unwavering calm. The story of Flight 219 would be told for years. The headline would scream about a 68-year-old woman, laughed at for claiming she could fly the plane, who saved 60 lives in a hurricane. But those who were there would remember more than the statistics. They would remember the calm, the skill, the quiet heroism of Eleanor Hayes. The woman who refused to be dismissed, who trusted her ability, and who brought 60 souls safely through the storm. And for Eleanor, standing on the tarmac, soaked and exhausted, she allowed herself a single quiet thought. We survived, and that is enough. End of story.